The night they plied me with alcohol to force me to sign the papers, they thought they had won. My parents believed they had taken the house I had spent my life saving for, and my younger brother smirked triumphantly, as if he had climbed to the peak of glory. But they didn't know that a lawyer, even when drunk, never forgets to prepare evidence. And from that moment I swore, if they chose betrayal, I would choose to sever ties, forever. Hello, my name is Travis Monroe. I'm 33 years old, a lawyer at a small firm in Denver, Colorado. My life isn't glamorous. A modest townhouse in Aurora, a beat-up sedan that's been with me for 7 years, and a wardrobe filled with office suits and a few casual t-shirts for home. I'm not the type to show off, nor do I have time to chase fleeting vanities. Every day I go to work, poring over stacks of case files, striving to build a stable life from the wages earned through sweat and tears. But if you ask me what I'm most proud of, I'd tell you about my house. Not because it's luxurious, but because it's the fruit of nearly a decade of relentless hard work. I saved every cent, every dollar to buy it. It's the place where I feel safe, the first home I built with my own hands. But I never imagined that this very house would become the spark that ignited the fractures in my family. I grew up in an average family, not wealthy but not destitute either. My father, David Monroe, 62, was once a skilled mechanic. He had rough hands, a booming voice, and an authoritarian demeanor that sometimes made me feel suffocated. My father loved comparing me to my younger brother, Kyle, the baby of the family whom he called dynamic and full of potential. My mother, Linda, was the opposite. She was gentle, always kind to me, but she had a habit that left me both sympathetic and helpless. She was easily swayed by my father and Kyle. Whenever my father raised his voice or Kyle insisted on something, my mother would stay silent, her eyes avoiding conflict as if she feared displeasing anyone. I knew she loved me, but her silence sometimes made me feel like an outsider in my own family. Kyle, my 28-year-old brother, was an entirely different story. He didn't have a steady job, yet he always appeared polished. Expensive dress shirts, a flashy watch, and a confident smile that turned heads. Kyle lived like a social media star, constantly posting pictures of parties at upscale bars, checking in at luxury resorts and boasting about startup projects or investment opportunities that I never fully understood. But my parents saw him differently. To them, Kyle was the golden child, the great hope of the Monroe family. They believed that with just a little capital, Kyle would achieve greatness, elevating the family to new heights. Whenever I heard my parents talk about Kyle with sparkling, proud eyes, I could only muster a forced smile, swallowing the bitter taste in my heart. I wasn't jealous of Kyle. I just wanted to live my own life, work hard, save money, and build a stable future. But sometimes I couldn't help but wonder, why did my parents always see Kyle as a precious gem, while I, the eldest son, the one who always shouldered the responsibilities, was just a faint shadow in their eyes? Then everything began to change when I invited my parents to live with me. They were in their 60s, and I couldn't bear to see them still living in a cramped rented house on the outskirts of Denver. That place was damp, with peeling walls, and every month they struggled to make rent. I thought, I have my townhouse. It's not big, but it's enough for 3 people to live comfortably. If they moved in with me, I could take care of them, and they wouldn't have to worry about rent anymore. It was a decision born out of filial piety, out of the love I had for my family. But I never expected that this decision would open a door to irreparable cracks. The day my parents moved in, I felt an indescribable joy. I rearranged the house, giving them the largest bedroom while I moved into a smaller one upstairs. I bought a new sofa, a new set of dishes, and even installed a big TV in the living room because I knew my father loved watching football. I wanted them to feel that this was their home, not just a place to stay. But from the very first days, I realized something. My parents didn't see this house the way I did. To me, it was an achievement, a source of pride. To them, it was just a place to live, a convenience I was obligated to provide as if it were my duty. When my parents moved in, I had prepared myself to shoulder everything. Each month I paid for electricity, water, internet, groceries, and the expensive prescriptions for my father's high blood pressure and my mother's arthritis. I didn't complain, at least not out loud. I cut back on personal expenses, gave up my morning coffee runs and dinners out with colleagues. Every evening after leaving the law office with tired eyes from reading hundreds of pages of documents, I still managed to smile as I walked through the door, setting groceries on the kitchen counter or handing my mother a paid pharmacy receipt. But my parents never said thank you. My father would nod, occasionally muttering something about how this house needs this or that. My mother was kinder, sometimes taking my hand and saying, "You're a good son, Travis." But those words, though warm, weren't enough to soothe the growing loneliness in my heart. I didn't need them to sing my praises. I just wanted a little acknowledgement, a bit of understanding for the days I worked myself to exhaustion to keep this household running. Then Kyle started showing up, more often than I could tolerate. Almost every day he'd breeze into my house with his flashy appearance, expensive dress shirts, a gleaming watch, and a confident smile that suggested the world was his to conquer. Kyle would sprawl on the sofa, grab a beer from the fridge as if it were his own home, and start talking about his latest startup project. "You won't believe this, Travis," he'd begin, his voice brimming with excitement. "I'm working with a group of investors. Just a little more capital and this app is going to take off." I'd nod, trying to keep my expression neutral, but deep down, I knew the truth. Kyle's projects were just embellished stories to mask his extravagant lifestyle. The parties, the luxurious trips, the glamorous check-in photos on social media. What frustrated me most was how my parents reacted to Kyle. Every time he showed up, the house seemed to light up. My father would pat Kyle's shoulder, calling him the family's hero, his eyes sparkling with pride. My mother would gaze at Kyle with hope, as if he held the key to all their dreams. Kyle knew how to play it. He'd talk about his investment opportunities with confident flair, weaving vague tales of big connections or deals about to close. And then, like a well-rehearsed script, he'd end with a sigh. "I just need a little capital to get things moving." Not much, just a few $1,000s. My parents, as if hypnotized, would nod immediately. "All right, don't worry," my father would say, his voice full of enthusiasm. "We'll take care of it." But what did take care of it mean? It meant turning to me. I knew full well the money they gave Kyle didn't come from their pockets. They didn't have a dime. It all came from me, from the funds I provided for household expenses. Every time Kyle asked for money, my parents would come to me with seemingly reasonable excuses. "Travis, I need some money for household supplies," or "the air conditioner's broken, your father needs funds to fix it." I wasn't naive. I knew that money often ended up in Kyle's hands, fueling his parties, his lavish trips, or whatever he used to maintain his successful entrepreneur image on social media. Once I caught my mother slipping a stack of cash to Kyle in the living room right after I got home from work. Kyle flashed a radiant smile, hugged her, then turned to me as if nothing had happened. "Thanks, Mom. Hey, Travis, what's for dinner tonight?" he asked, his tone carefree. I just nodded, swallowing the bitter taste in my heart. I tried to reason with them, not just once. During rare dinners with just my parents and me, I gently said, "Dad, Mom, I think Kyle should find a stable job. These projects sound great, but I haven't seen any real results." My father shot me a cold look. "Travis, you don't understand. Kyle has vision. He's going to do big things, not like you, just burying your nose in lawsuits." My mother, as usual, stayed silent, staring at her plate. My father's words cut like a knife, not just because they were unfair, but because they confirmed a truth I'd tried to avoid. In their eyes, I was never the most important. Kyle, with his empty promises and flashy lifestyle, always commanded their attention and love. The atmosphere in the house grew increasingly stifling. Dinners, meant to be a time for family bonding, turned into Kyle's personal stage, with my parents listening like captivated spectators. I ate quietly, cleaned up quietly, and retreated to my room quietly where I could briefly escape the feeling of being overlooked. But even in that small room, I couldn't escape the truth. I was living in a house I had bought with my sweat and tears, yet I felt like an outsider. Every night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I asked myself, how much longer could I keep this up? Was family worth sacrificing everything for, even when I knew deep down that my family was slowly pushing me away? One evening, after a long day at the law office dealing with a complex case, I returned home exhausted. The smell of grilled meat wafted from the kitchen, and I heard my mother bustling about preparing dinner. My father sat at the dining table reading the newspaper, while Kyle, as usual, showed up looking flashy. I sat down, trying to unwind and recover. Dinner started normally with small talk. Kyle, as always, dominated the conversation. He rambled on about a new tech project, some app he claimed would revolutionize how people connect. My father nodded, his eyes lighting up as if Kyle had invented the wheel. My mother smiled, placing an extra piece of meat on Kyle's plate, and said, "That sounds wonderful, Kyle." I ate quietly, trying not to dwell on the familiar feeling stirring in my chest. Then the atmosphere shifted. My father put down the newspaper and looked directly at me, his voice low and commanding. "Travis," he said, "I think it's time you did something for your brother." I looked up, slightly caught off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling about what was coming. Kyle jumped in, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "Travis, my project's at a critical stage. Just a little more capital and I can take it to the next level. Not much, just about $100,000. I nearly choked. $100,000. For someone like Kyle, who had never shown any real success beyond party photos on social media. I tried to stay calm and replied, "Kyle, I don't have that kind of money. I have my own expenses and I'm already supporting the whole household." My father's brow furrowed, his voice turning sharp. "Travis, it's your responsibility as the older brother. Kyle's trying to make something of himself and you're just hoarding your money." I was stunned. My responsibility? I was paying for electricity, water, internet, groceries, medical bills, everything in this house. And he called that hoarding? I looked to my mother, hoping she'd say something to diffuse the situation, but she only lowered her head and said softly, "Travis, it wouldn't hurt to help your brother a little. Kyle needs you." Her silence, as always, wasn't neutrality. It was tacit agreement with my father and Kyle, and it felt like a vice gripping my heart. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad, Mom, I get that Kyle wants to do something big. But I've heard him talk about these projects for a year now, and I haven't seen anything concrete. The parties, the trips, that's what I see most clearly. I can't risk that kind of money." My words were like pouring oil on a fire. My father slammed his hand on the table, his voice nearly a shout. "What kind of brother are you, Travis, so irresponsible? You only think of yourself. If you don't have the money, then mortgage the house. It's for your brother's future, for the whole family." I froze. Mortgage the house? The house I had spent nearly a decade saving for, working day and night to own? The house I opened up to my parents so they wouldn't have to live in a rented shack anymore? I looked at my mother, waiting for her to object, to say my father had gone too far. But she stayed silent, her eyes avoiding mine, and that silence was the final knife. I stood up, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I need time to think," I said, then walked to my room and slammed the door shut. My heart pounded, not from anger, but from a dizzying sense of betrayal, as if the ground had collapsed beneath me. My parents weren't just enabling Kyle's reckless spending. They were willing to sacrifice my house, the greatest achievement of my life, to fuel his pipe dreams. In that moment, I realized my family didn't just favor Kyle. They were ready to betray me to prop him up. In the days that followed, I became wary. I no longer looked at my parents with the trust I once had. Every word, every action of theirs I scrutinized, as if searching for signs of an approaching storm. And then it came, one late evening while I was working in my room. I had forgotten to fully close the door, and voices from the living room carried up, clear and chilling. My father was on the phone, his voice low but calculated. "Kyle, don't worry," he said. "Your mother and I will handle the paperwork for the transfer. As long as Travis signs, it's done. He won't suspect a thing." I nearly stopped breathing. Paperwork for a transfer? What were they talking about? But then the pieces started falling into place. The house. They were planning to pressure me into transferring ownership of my house, to them, or worse, to Kyle. I sat still, my hands gripping the edge of the desk, trying to keep my breathing steady. I wanted to storm out, confront my father right then and there, and scream that I had heard everything. But I didn't. Part of me still hoped I had misheard, that my parents couldn't be so heartless. But the larger, more rational part told me this was no idle talk. This was a real, carefully calculated plot, and I was the prey in their scheme. I said nothing, did nothing at that moment. But inside, a spark of vigilance ignited. I knew I had to be on guard to protect what was mine, even if it meant standing against my own family. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind reeling with questions. How could my parents do this to me? How could they be so willing to sacrifice everything I had built just to feed Kyle's delusions? And Kyle, he knew what I had done for the family, yet he was ready to put me in this position? I felt like I was standing at the edge of an abyss, where the family bonds I had once cherished were slowly dissolving. But at the same time, I felt a new strength, a strength born of clarity, of determination to protect myself. I knew from that moment on I could no longer trust anyone, not even those I once called family. The days that followed, I lived like a stranger in my own family. Each morning I left the house early, burying myself in work at the law office in Denver, trying to avoid the stifling atmosphere at home. But even amidst stacks of case files, I couldn't stop thinking about the words I overheard my father say to Kyle that night. Paperwork for the transfer. Travis won't suspect a thing. Those words echoed in my mind like a warning bell. I began paying closer attention to my father and Kyle. I noticed them whispering to each other, brief but secretive conversations that often happened when they thought I wasn't around. Once I walked into the living room and saw my father hurriedly hang up the phone, his eyes avoiding mine as he flashed a forced smile. It sent a chill down my spine. I no longer held illusions about fairness in my family. To my parents, Kyle was the golden child, their grand hope, while I was merely the provider, the one paying for electricity, medical bills, groceries, and now expected to sacrifice my house to fuel Kyle's dreams. Every time I thought about it, my heart felt crushed. I had done everything to hold this family together, but now I realized that the family I imagined existed only in my mind, not in reality. The reality was that my parents had chosen Kyle, and I was just a tool to get what they wanted. One afternoon, while my parents were out shopping, I did something I never thought I would. I checked my father's phone. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed the truth. His phone was left on the dining table unlocked, as if he was too confident I'd never suspect anything. I scrolled through his messages, my heart pounding, and then I saw it. A chain of texts between him and Kyle, clear and ruthless, like a knife to the chest. "Friday night," Kyle wrote. "Get Travis drunk, then bring out the papers. He'll sign. He won't suspect a thing." My father replied, "Don't worry, I'll handle it. He always does what he's told." I stood there, hands trembling, feeling the blood in my veins turn to ice. They had planned it. They wanted me to sign a deed, taking away ownership of the house I had spent my youth building. They intended to get me drunk, exploit my trust, and strip me of everything. I put the phone down, returned to my room, and sat in silence, my mind reeling. I briefly considered confronting them, telling them I knew their entire scheme. But then I realized it would solve nothing. They would deny it, make excuses, and I'd fall back into the trap of hoping my family could change. No, I needed a plan. I needed to protect myself, not just for the house, but for my self-respect, for the years I had sacrificed for people who never valued me. For several nights, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wrestling with myself. I asked, how could I keep living with my parents, with Kyle, knowing they were ready to betray me like this? Part of me still loved them, still remembered the childhood days when my father taught me to fix a bike, when my mother held me as I cried. But those memories were now just fragments, overshadowed by the bitter truth. My family was no longer the one I once knew. I thought about leaving, selling the house and starting over somewhere else where I wouldn't have to endure this injustice. But then I realized running away wasn't the answer. If I left, I'd let them win, let them take everything I had built. No, I wouldn't let that happen. Finally, I made a bold decision. I would let them carry out their plan. I would play the part of the obedient eldest son, the one who suspected nothing, and let them think they had won. But at the right moment, I would expose everything. This was no longer just about the house. It was a final test of our family bond, a chance to see if my parents and Kyle truly saw me as family, or merely a tool to exploit. If they chose betrayal, I would choose to sever the remaining ties of affection, no matter how painful. I began preparing. I checked my phone, ensuring it had enough battery and storage to record audio. I reviewed legal documents, studying quitclaim deeds, the type of paperwork I suspected they'd use for the transfer. I considered signing with an unusual signature, perhaps adding an extra stroke or omitting a character so I could later prove I was coerced if needed. I wasn't just a lawyer who buried his nose in lawsuits, as my father once said. I knew how to protect myself, and I would use every bit of my knowledge and skills to ensure I didn't lose everything. Each step of preparation was a cut to my heart. I didn't want to do this. Didn't want to have to guard against my own parents. Didn't want to plan as if facing enemies. But I had no choice. I had given them too many chances, sacrificed too much, only to receive disregard and betrayal in return. A deep sadness washed over me, as if I were saying goodbye to a part of myself, the part that trusted in family, that hoped love could overcome all. But at the same time, I felt a strange relief. For the first time in years, I knew I would live for myself, not for the so-called Monroe family. I no longer wanted to be the son who sacrificed everything only to be hurt. I stood up, looking out the window where the faint streetlights glowed. My heart still raced, but not from fear. It was the pulse of determination, of a man ready to face the storm. I knew the days ahead wouldn't be easy. I would have to confront my parents, Kyle, and perhaps even myself. Friday evening arrived like a meticulously staged play. When I got home from work, the smell of grilled meat and fried potatoes filled the house. My father sat at the dining table, his face unusually cheerful. "Travis, tonight we're throwing a party," he announced, his voice brimming with excitement. "You just won a big case. We've got to celebrate." I was surprised. Won a case? It was true, I had recently closed a successful case, but it wasn't anything monumental. Then Kyle walked in, wearing a pristine white dress shirt, his smile as polished as a professional actor's. "That's right, Travis. You deserve a celebration," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. My mother was busy in the kitchen preparing a lavish spread, roasted beef, salad, bread, and an expensive bottle of whiskey. But when I looked at my mother, I sensed something was off. She bustled about arranging plates, but her eyes were filled with anxiety, her hands trembling as she set the table. She knew something was wrong. I could feel it. She was uneasy, but as always, she chose silence, unwilling to stand up to my father or Kyle. I sat down, keeping my expression neutral, but inside I was on high alert. The phone in my jacket pocket had been recording since I walked through the door. I knew tonight wasn't just a party. This was their stage, and I was the reluctant lead actor. The party began with lively chatter and laughter, but I could sense the falseness behind every smile. My father raised his glass of whiskey, his voice booming. "Here's to Travis, to the Monroe family." I took a small sip, careful to stay sober. But my father wouldn't let me stop. "Drink up, son," he said, pouring more whiskey into my glass. "It's a happy day, drink for the family." Kyle joined in, playing the enthusiastic younger brother to perfection. "Travis, you're the pride of our family," he said, refilling my glass, his eyes glinting as if he were performing a script he knew by heart. I forced a smile, raised my glass, but only let the liquid touch my lips, leaving most of the whiskey untouched. My mother sat to the side, uneasy, occasionally murmuring, "Travis, don't drink too much, dear." But her voice was feeble, as if she knew her words carried no weight. She didn't dare stop my father or Kyle, and her silence, as always, stabbed at my heart. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense despite the outward cheer. I could feel the calculation in every gesture, every word. My father kept pushing me to drink, his tone growing more urgent. "Come on, Travis, finish that glass. What kind of man is so weak?" Kyle piled on the praise, recounting my big win in the case with details I knew he'd fabricated. I played along, pretending to be tipsy, letting my head tilt slightly, laughing louder than usual, even dropping my fork on the floor to make them think I was losing control. But inside, I was sharp as a tack. Every word, every glance from them I memorized. The phone in my pocket was still recording, silently capturing every sound of this charade. Then the moment arrived. As the air grew heavy with the scent of alcohol, Kyle casually placed a blue folder on the table amidst the clutter of plates. "Oh, Dad, what's this?" he asked, his tone innocent, as if he'd just stumbled upon a forgotten item. My father glanced at it, feigning surprise. "Oh, just some administrative papers, nothing important." But his eyes flicked to me, cold and calculating. "Travis, sign this for me, will you? It's just a small formality." I swayed slightly, squinting at the folder as if I couldn't see clearly. But I knew exactly what was inside. A quitclaim deed, the document to transfer ownership of my house to my parents. They thought that, in my drunken state, I'd sign without reading, without suspicion. I picked up the folder, flipping through a few pages, mumbling like a drunk. "What's this, Dad?" My father laughed heartily, patting my shoulder. "Nothing big, son. Just some paperwork to make it easier for us to manage the family's assets. Sign it, and we'll keep eating." Kyle chimed in, his voice sugary. "Travis, just sign it. We'll take care of everything." I looked at my mother, hoping once again that she'd speak up, stop them. But she only bowed her head, her hands clenched under the table, her eyes filled with guilt but silent. I picked up the pen, my hand trembling, not from the alcohol but from the anger burning inside me. I knew that if I refused now, they'd find another way, and I'd lose my chance to expose them. So I played along. I scrawled my signature, deliberately making it sloppy, adding an extra stroke to the T, elongating the S more than usual. Small details only I would recognize. I knew these subtle irregularities could serve as evidence if I had to stand in court tomorrow to prove I was coerced. I slid the folder back to my father, forcing a smile. "Done. Done, Dad." Kyle's face practically glowed, his eyes sparkling as if he'd just won the lottery. He glanced at my father, giving a subtle nod. My father raised his glass, his voice booming. "Well done, Travis. Let's toast to the family." I sat still, my eyes half closed, playing the part of a drunken fool. My parents and brother thought I had fallen into their trap, that I had handed over my house, the greatest achievement of my life, because of a few glasses of whiskey and their sweet words. But they didn't know that I had been in control from the start of the evening. The phone in my pocket was still recording, capturing every word, every laugh, every moment of this betrayal. I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the first step in the game I had set in motion. They thought I was the prey, but they didn't realize I was the one orchestrating this play. As the party ended, Kyle left with a triumphant smile. My father patted my shoulder once more, and my mother quietly cleaned up, avoiding my gaze. I went to my room, closed the door, and sank onto the bed. In the darkness, I felt a strange calm. They thought they had won, but they didn't know that from the beginning they were the prey and I was the hunter. After the party, I became more vigilant than ever. Every step, every word spoken in the house I observed with the alertness of a lawyer preparing for a major case. I no longer looked at my parents with the eyes of a dutiful son. I knew that if I wanted to protect myself, I had to act discreetly without letting them suspect I was aware of their plan. I started by placing a small recording device in the living room, hidden under a bookshelf where my parents often sat and talked. The device was compact, unnoticed, but sensitive enough to capture every whisper. I also attached a tracking device to my parents' car, the old minivan I had paid to repair months earlier. I wasn't proud of these actions, but I had no other choice. If they were plotting to take my house, I needed to know their every move, every meeting, every word. The tracker helped me do that. I downloaded a tracking app on my phone, and every time my parents left the house, I knew exactly where they went. Thanks to those devices, I began to piece together a clear picture of their scheme. Just a few days after the party, I overheard a conversation in the living room when they thought I was asleep. "Kyle said he's found a broker," my father said, his voice low but tinged with excitement. "They say this house could sell for a good price, at least $400,000. My mother responded hesitantly. "But David, doing this to Travis, is it right?" My father snapped, "Linda, you're always worrying about nonsense. This is for Kyle's future, for the whole family. Travis will understand." I sat in my room, my heart pounding, not from anger, but from a chilling realization spreading through me. They didn't just want to take my house. They had calculated its sale price, contacted a broker, and were ready to move forward without a thought for me. With Kyle's urging, things moved faster than I expected. Just 2 weeks after the party, my parents and Kyle had found a buyer. Through another recorded conversation, I heard my father tell Kyle, "The contract's signed. The money will hit the account next week." Kyle responded, his voice brimming with excitement. "Awesome, Dad. I'll use this money to push the project forward. Don't worry, I'll take care of the family." I sat in my room, listening to their words, feeling an odd calm. They thought they had secured a life-changing opportunity, that the $420,000 from selling my house would make Kyle's dreams come true. But they didn't know that with every step they were digging themselves deeper into the trap I had prepared. Then I uncovered the final part of their plan. They intended to disappear. One evening, as I pretended to work late in my room, I overheard my parents whispering about moving to Florida. "Kyle says it's easier to do business there," my father said, his voice full of hope. "We'll start over, live more comfortably. Travis, he'll manage on his own," my mother replied, her voice trembling. "But leaving him like this—" My father cut her off. "Linda, enough! Travis is strong. He'll be fine. Kyle's the one who needs us." My heart turned cold as I listened. They weren't just taking my house, selling my life's work. They were planning to abandon me as if I were merely an obstacle on their path to a better life. I didn't intervene. I didn't confront them or try to stop them. I let them continue packing their suitcases in secret, making hushed phone calls with Kyle to plan their departure. I tracked everything, from the recordings to the location data from the car. Every detail I documented like a lawyer preparing for a crucial case. There was no anger left in me. Instead, I felt a cold, calm resolve, as if I had seen through everything. I had once loved my parents, hoped that family bonds could overcome any injustice, but now I understood that those bonds existed only in my mind, not in their hearts. Kyle, with his empty promises, had claimed their trust, and I, the eldest son who had sacrificed everything, was just a tool for them to use. But I was no longer sad about it. I was ready to face them, not as a son, but as a man who knew his own worth. Each night I reviewed the audio files, noting every location my parents visited, every meeting with the broker, every lie Kyle told. I imagined the day they would realize I knew everything, the day Kyle's triumphant smile would fade, the day my parents would face the consequences of their betrayal. But I wasn't in a rush. I waited like a patient hunter, knowing my moment would come. They thought they had won, but they didn't know that in this game I held the final card. The day came sooner than I expected. One Tuesday afternoon, I returned home after a long day at the law office in Denver. As I opened the door, an unusual stillness greeted me. No sound of the TV blaring my father's favorite football game. No clatter of my mother bustling in the kitchen. No echo of Kyle's laughter from the living room. The house was empty, cold, as if its soul had been stripped away. I stepped inside, set my briefcase down, and walked through the house. My parents' bedroom was bare. No suitcases, no clothes, no sign of their presence. The fridge held only a few cans of beer, and on the dining table a small note in my father's scrawled handwriting. "Travis, we're visiting friends for a few days. We'll be in touch soon, don't worry." I stood there staring at the note, a faint smile crossing my lips. Visiting friends for a few days? I knew they weren't coming back. The tracker on their car had already given me the answer. They were at the airport preparing to board a flight to Florida where they believed Kyle would lead them to a new life. But I wasn't angry, wasn't panicked. I had seen this coming, had anticipated it from their whispered conversations, their secretly packed suitcases, their clumsy lies. I was calm, like someone who had seen through everything, who was ready for this moment. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began assembling the case file I had meticulously gathered over the past weeks. Each piece of evidence was a puzzle piece, and together, they formed a complete picture. The story of a carefully calculated plot to steal my house. I wasn't doing this just to reclaim my house. This was no longer about property. It was about justice, about protecting my self-respect, about showing my parents and Kyle that they couldn't exploit me without consequences. I copied the entire file onto a USB drive and contacted Karina, a trusted lawyer friend from college. Karina was a sharp civil litigator, and I knew she would understand the value of this evidence. "Travis, are you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked when I handed her the USB at a cafe in Denver. I nodded, my voice steady. "Karina, I have no other choice. They've gone too far." She looked at me, her eyes a mix of empathy and determination. "All right, I'll review everything and prepare to take this to court if needed. You did the right thing by keeping all this evidence. But before bringing everything to light, I wanted my parents to face the truth. I wanted them to know I was never deceived, that I had seen and heard everything." I opened my laptop, created a new email, and attached the audio files and tracking data. I sent it to my parents' email addresses with copies to their phone numbers via text. The subject line was simple: the truth. I sat there in the empty house, imagining their panic as they opened the email. I pictured my father, his face flushed with anger, realizing I had recorded every word he said. I pictured my mother, her ever-anxious eyes trembling as she understood her silent complicity had been exposed. I pictured Kyle, his triumphant smile fading as he realized his entire plan had been laid bare. They thought I was naive, an obedient eldest son who would sacrifice and comply. But they were wrong. I had their scheme in the palm of my hand, and now I was the one in control. I didn't send the email for revenge. I sent it so they would understand that no matter how they saw me, I was still Travis Monroe. A man who knew his worth, who wouldn't let anyone take what was rightfully his. I didn't expect apologies, didn't expect them to change. I just wanted them to face the consequences of their betrayal, to confront the truth that I was never fooled. Just a few hours after sending the email, my phone began buzzing incessantly. My father's name flashed on the screen, call after call, interspersed with messages from my mother. "Travis, honey, we were wrong. Please call us back. Travis, please talk to us. Don't make this a big deal. We'll explain everything." I sat in the empty house, watching the screen light up every few seconds, but I didn't answer. Each message, each call was proof of their panic. They had received the email, heard the audio files. They knew I had uncovered everything, that I wasn't the naive son they thought I was. But I stayed silent. I wanted them to taste the desperation, to feel the cost of the betrayal they had chosen. Day after day, the calls and messages grew more frequent. My father sent long texts, alternating between pleading and anger. "Travis, you can't do this to your family. Do you want us to go to jail?" My mother sent short, tearful messages. "Honey, I'm sorry. I didn't want this." But I remained silent. Not because I no longer cared for them, but because they had chosen Kyle. They had sold my house, planned to abandon me with nothing. I couldn't let pity cloud the truth. Then one morning, about a week after they left, I heard urgent knocking at the door. I opened it to find my parents, David and Linda, standing there, haggard and exhausted, as if they had aged a decade in just a few days. My father, with his disheveled gray hair and bloodshot eyes, stood with shoulders slumped, no longer the proud figure he once was. My mother, her face pale and hands trembling, clutched a crumpled handkerchief. They were no longer the confident couple dreaming of a new life in Florida. They were defeated, ashamed, and bewildered, standing at the door of my house, or rather the small apartment I had rented temporarily after the townhouse was sold. "Travis," my mother began, her voice choked with tears. "Can we come in and talk?" I looked at them, said nothing, and simply opened the door wider. They stepped inside, sat on the worn-out sofa, their eyes avoiding mine. My father cleared his throat, trying to muster his usual authoritative tone, but his voice trembled. "Travis, you sent those files. What do you want? Do you want us to go to court to tear this family apart?" I sat across from them, arms crossed, my face impassive. "Dad, Mom, I don't want anything. I just wanted you to see the truth, that you chose Kyle, sold my house, and planned to leave me behind." My mother burst into tears, her hands clutching the handkerchief tightly. "Honey, I didn't want this. I thought we were helping Kyle, helping the family." My father interrupted, his voice sharp but lacking strength. "Travis, don't make this bigger than it is. We're family, we can work this out." But I didn't respond. I just looked at them, waiting. And then, as if they had no other choice, they began to confess. My father sighed, bowing his head. We gave most of the money from the house sale to Kyle," he said, his voice heavy. "He said he needed it for investments for his startup. We believed he'd make something of himself, that he'd change our lives." My mother cut in, her voice trembling. "I told your father not to give him so much, but he said Kyle needed the chance. I just wanted our family to be better, Travis." I almost laughed, but the laugh didn't come. Change their lives? With Kyle? The one who only knew how to party, boast, and live off empty promises? "And then what?" I asked, my voice calm but icy. "Where's Kyle now? Where's the money?" They exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with panic. My father muttered, "After you sent those files, we tried to reach Kyle, but he didn't answer. His phone's off, no replies to messages. He's vanished." My mother sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I don't know, Travis. I don't know why he did this to us." The truth didn't surprise me. I had suspected it all along. Kyle, their golden child, had taken the money from my house and disappeared, leaving them to face the consequences. I looked at them. The people who once meant everything to me, now reduced to two haggard figures, brought down by their own blind favoritism. But I didn't feel triumphant. I only felt an emptiness, as if the last remnants of affection I had for them had been drained. "You chose Kyle," I said, my voice even. "You chose to believe him, to sell my house, to abandon me. Now when Kyle's gone, you come back begging. But what do you expect me to do? Forgive you? Give you money? Keep being the bottomless wallet for this family?" My father tried to stand, his voice weak. "Travis, don't talk like that. We're family." But I cut him off. "Family? Families don't betray each other. You made your choice, and this is the consequence." I stood, opened the door, and gestured for them to leave. My mother sobbed, reaching for my hand, but I gently pulled away. "I've given the evidence to my lawyer," I said. "What happens next is up to the law. You're on your own now." My father looked at me, his eyes a mix of anger and helplessness, then led my mother out of the apartment. As the door closed, I stood there, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I didn't want them to suffer, but I couldn't save them from the choices they made. After that confrontation, my parents returned to the life they had once tried to escape, renting. They moved into a rundown, cramped apartment in the suburbs, a place even shabbier than the rental they had lived in before. From dreaming of a new life in Florida where they believed Kyle would lead them to wealth, they now found themselves back at square one, or even worse. No money, no house, no hope. I imagined my father, his shoulders slumped, sitting on a worn-out chair in that apartment, his eyes empty. I pictured my mother, her trembling hands trying to clean a cramped kitchen, unable to hide the sorrow in her eyes. They had bet everything on Kyle and they had lost. The money from the sale of my house, $420,000, had vanished with Kyle. My parents had given him nearly all of it, convinced it was an investment in a startup project that would change their lives. But now, as the buyer of the house discovered issues with the transfer paperwork, they began contacting my parents, demanding explanations and threatening legal action. Karina, my lawyer friend, informed me that the buyer was considering a lawsuit, suspecting fraud in the transfer process. My parents, as the ones who signed the contract, now faced the risk of being sued with not a single penny to cover compensation or defend themselves. Bills piled up, rent, utilities, living expenses, bearing down on them while the money from my house had disappeared with Kyle. Their already precarious life had now hit a dead end, like a stranded ship with no way out. But what hurt them more than the loss of money was the destruction of their reputation. News of their collusion with Kyle to seize my property spread like wildfire. Relatives, friends, and those who once respected my father as a skilled mechanic or admired my mother as a kind woman now looked at them with contempt. I heard that our aunt and uncle in Boulder refused to meet them, and former neighbors whispered behind their backs whenever they appeared. How could they treat Travis like that? I overheard an acquaintance say during a chance encounter at a cafe. The eldest son, who provided everything for them, betrayed for a useless younger brother. Those words didn't bring me satisfaction. They only deepened the emptiness I felt. And Kyle, the golden child of my parents, had vanished. No calls, no messages, no trace. His phone was disconnected, his social media accounts went silent, and his rented apartment in downtown Denver had been vacated long ago. In their desperation, my parents tried to track him down, calling the friends he used to brag about, even visiting the upscale bars he frequented. But no one knew where Kyle was. He had fled, taking the money and leaving my parents with nothing. I imagined the moment they realized the truth. The son they had placed all their trust in, the one they sacrificed everything for, including me, was just a manipulator who didn't care about them once he got what he wanted. In their destitution, my parents began to wake up, but it was too late. I heard from acquaintances that my father, once authoritarian and proud of Kyle, now sat for hours in their rented apartment muttering about his mistakes. My mother, her eyes red and swollen, started mentioning me in conversations with neighbors, her voice filled with regret. Travis, he's a good son. We were wrong not to cherish him. I didn't see my parents again after their visit to my apartment. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't reach out. Part of me still ached when I thought of them. But the larger part, the part that had learned to stand firm, reminded me that they had chosen their path. I continued my life in my small Denver apartment, working at the law firm, focusing on what remained, my self-respect and the justice I was pursuing. Karina, my lawyer friend, occasionally updated me on the situation. She said the buyer was seriously considering suing my parents for suspected fraud in the sale of the townhouse. The evidence I had given her was strong enough to protect my interests if the case went to court. Karina explained that if the buyer pursued the lawsuit, my parents would face severe legal consequences as they were the ones who signed the sale contract. I didn't know how they would handle it in their dilapidated rented apartment with nothing to their name and no Kyle to rely on, but I knew I couldn't save them. Not because I didn't want to, but because I could no longer sacrifice for those who had betrayed me so callously. Sitting in my small Denver apartment, I often reflect on the journey that brought me here. From the days when I opened my home to my parents, shouldering every expense in the hope of giving them a better life, to the moment I uncovered their plot, the whispers, the plan to get me drunk, the transfer papers hidden in a blue folder. I witnessed my parents' blind favoritism toward Kyle, saw how they were willing to sell my house to fuel his dreams. And then, when it all came crashing down, when Kyle vanished with the money from the sale, when my parents returned to a life of renting with mounting debts and shattered reputations, I realized a bitter truth. Trust, once betrayed, can never be regained. I used to believe that family bonds were unbreakable, that family was a place where I could pour my heart without fear of being hurt. But I was wrong. Family cannot be an excuse for injustice, cannot justify deception. My parents chose Kyle, not because he deserved it, but because they misplaced their faith. Their favoritism didn't just destroy me, the eldest son who quietly carried the burden, it tore apart the entire Monroe family. I saw it clearly. When parents elevate one child above another, when they let bias cloud their judgment, they don't just lose a child, they lose themselves. But from the ashes of that family, I learned to rise. I'm no longer the Travis of old, the one who sacrificed everything for duty, for family. I've learned to set boundaries, to protect myself, even if it means walking away from those I once loved most. If I have a message for anyone listening to this story, it's this. Know how to set boundaries with toxic relationships, even if they're with family. Family is precious, but it cannot be an excuse for letting others trample your self-respect. You can't change others, but you can change how you respond to them. And sometimes letting go is the only way to find yourself again. Justice, I've realized, doesn't just lie in courtrooms. Karina, my lawyer friend, is still working on the evidence I gave her. The buyer of the house has started questioning the legality of the transfer, and my parents may face legal consequences for what they did. But for me, justice isn't just about rulings on paper. Justice is choosing to live true to your values, deciding to stand up for what's yours, even if it means confronting your family. I chose that path, and though it hasn't been easy, I have no regrets. I once thought losing my house meant losing everything. But now I understand that money can be repaid, houses can be bought again, but trust and love, once lost, are gone forever. My parents, with their blind favoritism, set themselves on a path to ruin, only to realize, too late, that they had lost the son who once loved them unconditionally. The story of the Monroe family may be over, but my story isn't. I, Travis Monroe, won't let the wounds of the past define me. I'll carry this lesson about trust, about family, about justice, and I'll live not for anyone else, but for myself. I take a deep breath, feeling freedom flood my chest. Under the faint glow of the streetlights, I know that no matter how difficult the road ahead may be, I'll walk it with the self-respect and determination no one can take away.